Before we begin, leave a comment with where you're watching from and the exact minute your clock shows when these words reach you. Time and place matter in stories like this because every documented account has its coordinates and every disappearance its echo. We're tracing not only what happened inside a house, but also when its shadow still falls. The year was 1908, northern New York, the upper edge of Essex County, where the last of the old carriage roads wound toward the Adirondack foothills and the winters still outlasted memory. In the small hamlet of Briar Hollow, the Blackthorne family name carried the weight of both wealth and worry. Their estate stood 2 miles north of the village proper, an expanse of cut limestone and slate called Blackthorne Hall, a 3-story Gothic mansion overlooking the Saranac River bend. Its gables and Widow's Walk were said to catch the morning light in a way that turned the entire facade a pale metallic blue, like frozen breath. For half a century, the family had been known for mining, for lumber contracts, and for keeping to themselves. Their servants were few, their gates locked by habit, and their church had been empty since 1899. According to the county records, the family's patriarch, Edward Alastair Blackthorne, had inherited the property in 1893, along with its debts, its furniture, and a rumor that the house had been built over an earlier foundation predating the Civil War. His wife, Catherine, was rarely seen in town, and their 2 surviving children, Julian, aged 12, and Clara, aged 10, were educated privately inside the estate. The household staff consisted of a caretaker, a cook, and a maid, all of whom resided in the carriage house at the edge of the property. To outsiders, the Blackthornes lived a life both enviable and unapproachable. Yet, behind the symmetry of their stone walls, there were records of private letters later retrieved from the estate sale archives that suggest a creeping deterioration of the family's peace. The earliest indication appears in a letter from Edward to his London business partner, dated February 4, 1908. The renovations of the upper floor have produced certain architectural oddities we did not anticipate. The attic, once believed to be nothing more than storage space beneath the rafters, extends farther than its exterior dimensions would logically allow. We have dismissed the carpenter responsible, but I remain troubled by the measurements. That letter was found decades later folded into the back of a ledger preserved by the Saranac Historical Society. By March of that year, neighbors began to notice irregularities at the estate. The cook resigned abruptly, citing indoor drafts and whispering from no source, according to her statement filed during the inquest that would follow months later. Edward hired new workers from Albany to finish the attic reinforcement. Steel bracing, new insulation, and a small observatory window facing north toward the river. Invoices recovered from Davenport and Sons contractors list soundproofing panels, brass fittings, and padlocked access. On April 2, 1908, the Briar Hollow postmaster recorded receiving a parcel from the estate addressed to Dr. Alton Meyer, a physician in Plattsburgh known for treating cases of nervous disposition. The package contained 3 sealed vials of clear liquid, later determined to be preservative alcohol, and a note in Catherine Blackthorne's handwriting. They move again at night. The sounds come from the attic beams. Edward will not look. No formal follow-up was made, and Dr. Meyer's correspondence stops abruptly that spring. The first official record of concern came from Deputy Sheriff Nathaniel Dodd, whose patrol report dated May 12th describes light visible through the attic window past midnight and the distinct impression of movement, not human, behind the glass. Dodd made a routine visit to the estate the following morning and was received by Edward himself, who dismissed the matter as a reflection from a lantern. Dodd's notes mention that Catherine appeared pale and nervous and that the children were nowhere in sight. Throughout that summer, the Blackthorne property seemed to withdraw from public life entirely. Deliveries were left at the outer gate. The caretaker reportedly left without collecting wages, and a hired hand named Leo Frazier claimed he heard hammering from the attic long after the family had gone to sleep. When he confronted Edward about it, the man told him that structural adjustments were underway and threatened dismissal if questioned further. Then, On September 3, 1908, the Briar Hollow constable received a telegram from a visiting cousin of the family, Miss Eleanor Hargreaves, stating she had arrived at Blackthorne Hall to find the house locked, the grounds untended, and no answer to her calls. The front door was barred from the inside. Concerned, she traveled back to town to fetch help. By the time officials returned with her 2 days later, the locks had been removed and the main doors stood open. Inside, the first floor appeared undisturbed with clean carpets, dishes washed, and the faint odor of lamp oil hanging in the hall. In the parlor, a clock had stopped at 2:17 a.m. Upstairs, the bedrooms showed signs of recent occupancy, beds unmade, but not ransacked. Catherine's dressing table still bore a silver hairbrush with strands of dark hair caught in the bristles. Yet, when investigators reached the attic door, they found it secured with 3 separate locks, 2 on the outside, 1 on the inside. The wood surrounding the frame was scorched as if exposed to intense heat. When the door was finally forced open, witnesses described a scene that would remain the subject of speculation and sealed testimony for the next century. The attic was lined with metal plating, the walls engraved with repeating circular markings. In the center of the floor stood 3 chairs bolted into the boards, each containing remnants of charred fabric and the faint outline of restraints. A smell of ozone and iron hung in the air. There were no human remains, only ash collected neatly in brass urns, each engraved with an identical inscription: "The debt is reconciled." According to the official record, the urns were removed for analysis by a representative from the state coroner's office, but those samples and the accompanying notes were lost in transit between Saranac and Albany. From that point onward, the investigation entered a phase that locals would later describe as a quiet quarantine of information, the first sign that something at Blackthorne Hall was never meant to be explained. The official inquiry into the Blackthorne disappearance began quietly on September 7, 1908, under the supervision of County Coroner Alfred Renly. His preliminary notes, preserved only through a carbon copy held by the Plattsburgh Record, describe a domestic incident of indeterminate origin and recommend temporary sealing of the residence pending structural review. Yet within 3 days, representatives from Albany arrived unannounced. 2 men identified only as consultants from the State Bureau of Public Health, and the case abruptly shifted jurisdiction. Sheriff Dodd's subsequent entries mention repeated requests for access denied on the grounds of contagion potential. No communicable illness was ever specified. Rumors spread quickly through Briar Hollow. Some said the attic plates were electrical experiments gone wrong. Others whispered that Edward Blackthorne had dabbled in early wireless transmission or magnetic therapy and had accidentally killed his family. None of these explanations accounted for the missing bodies, nor for the fact that all family portraits had been removed from their frames, leaving only dust outlines on the walls. By late September, the estate was padlocked under state authority. The caretaker's quarters were demolished, ostensibly due to mold contamination. Yet, when local carpenter Henry Marston was contracted to dispose of debris, he later told a reporter that the timber beams bore marks identical to those etched in the attic plates. Repeated circles intersected by diagonal slashes, as if the pattern were reproducing itself through the grain. His statement never appeared in print. The newspaper editor received a telegram instructing him to suspend publication, pending further verification. In October 1908, the county clerk's ledger records a sudden change in property ownership. Blackthorne Hall was transferred to the Department of State Public Works for infrastructure study. The justification made little sense. The estate was miles from any main road, but the paperwork was stamped and filed. From that point forward, local memory of the mansion faded into rumor and retelling. Winter 1908. 1909 was severe. Heavy snow collapsed the east porch and buried the gateposts, and by spring few in town cared to speak of the place. For over a decade, the official narrative remained that the family had succumbed to accidental fire and improper ventilation, their remains cremated by the extreme heat, documented in attic photographs. Those photographs, reportedly archived in Albany, have never resurfaced. What survives are 6 contact prints rediscovered in 1921 among the estate papers of Dr. Renly's widow. The images, each only 2 inches square, depict what appear to be concentric scorch patterns radiating from a single point in the attic floor. Under magnification, faint silhouettes, possibly of chairs, are visible, surrounded by metallic residue. The reawakening of interest began in 1923, when surveyors from the newly formed State Power Commission were tasked with assessing the property for a proposed hydroelectric line. Their supervisor, James Fell, filed an internal memorandum noting unusual electromagnetic readings within the sealed attic even after 15 years of abandonment. His instruments registered oscillations he described as audible hum without source. 2 days later, the memorandum was marked restricted. Fell died the following spring of what the medical examiner termed neurological complications. His notes were retrieved by his assistant and stored in a family trunk until 1974, when they were donated to the Essex County Historical Trust. From these recovered documents, a timeline emerges. Between 1908 and 1923, at least 4 state agencies entered the property under varying pretenses: public health, utilities, structural safety, and archival conservation. Each left minimal paperwork and identical closing statements. Condition stable, site to remain sealed. This repetition suggests a pattern of containment rather than ignorance. In 1930, an anonymous letter reached the Adirondack Chronicle, signed only "Former Caretaker." The writer claimed that beneath the attic flooring lay a secondary chamber accessible through a concealed hatch, and that what lived below fed upon the current above. The letter was dismissed as sensational fiction, yet 20 years later, renovation crews indeed uncovered a sub-attic crawl space during state stabilization efforts. Inside were rusted copper conduits descending into the foundation, their ends fused by heat. Engineers described the design as half plumbing, half instrument. The conduits were dismantled and shipped to Albany for study. No report was ever issued. Throughout the mid-20th century, references to the Blackthorne estate appeared sporadically in county correspondence, always redacted and always footnoted with project codes, unrelated to any known construction. Then, in 1958, a new set of photographs surfaced during an estate auction in Burlington, Vermont. They showed the mansion from an aerial perspective, the roof partly collapsed, the attic plates visible as glints through broken slate. What startled archivists was the geometric precision of the pattern: 3 interlocking circles forming a triangle at the apex of the gable. When overlaid on early survey maps, the formation aligned perfectly with magnetic north. That alignment drew the attention of Dr. Edwin Marquette, a physicist at Clarkson College, who obtained permission to test residual magnetism at the site in 1961. His instruments recorded faint but measurable pulses emanating from the attic flooring every 87 seconds, consistent over several hours. Marquette's report concludes with an ambiguous statement. The readings resemble a decaying electrical signal attempting to repeat a pattern. 2 weeks after submission, Marquette resigned from the college and accepted an unlisted government position. His personal copy of the report vanished after his death in 1972. By then, the local population of Briar Hollow had dwindled to fewer than 100 residents. The old estate, overgrown with birch and ivy, had become a cautionary landmark whispered about by children and avoided by hunters. Yet each spring, as snowmelt exposed the slate ruins, new visitors arrived. University researchers, military surveyors, and even a team from the National Geographic Society in 1976 all requested the same thing: access to the attic. All left without comment. In 1989, during a routine cataloging of state property deeds, archivist Linda Carrington discovered that the Blackthorne parcel no longer appeared on any active record. The numbering jumped from 211B to 211D, as though the land had been administratively erased. She inquired with the Department of Records and was told the file was in long-term transfer. That phrase, common in bureaucratic euphemisms, usually meant destroyed. But Carrington was meticulous. She traced microfilm backups and located a single reference on a 1911 ledger margin, relocated to federal custody per Executive Order 3174. No Order 3174 is known to exist. Carrington's memorandum to her supervisor was her final professional act before she left the department, citing stress-related illness. 3 months later, she was killed in a traffic collision outside Ticonderoga. The only recovered item from her vehicle was a small cloth envelope containing a rusted brass tag etched with the Blackthorne crest and the words Attic A1. Her death reignited dormant speculation. Journalists revisiting the case found themselves confronting a century of missing data, burnt ledgers, misplaced blueprints, and sealed correspondence between Albany and Washington. Even the mansion's demolition date was uncertain. Some records list 1910, others 1935. Yet aerial photographs from as late as 1957 show portions of the structure still standing. What remained consistent through every decade was the pattern of silence. Each witness, each investigator, and each bureaucrat who glimpsed the attic either retracted their statement or vanished into other employment. The state's final entry on record, dated October 12, 1990, reads simply, "Site neutralized. No further observation recommended." The phrase "site neutralized" would later appear again in an entirely different case file from the Western Adirondacks, but that connection belongs to another investigation altogether. By the turn of the century, Blackthorne Hall was little more than a legend, a local ghost story told beside campfires along the Saranac. But legends, when cross-checked against surviving paperwork, often proved to be reports in disguise. And in 2004, one such report surfaced hidden in a box, misfiled under agricultural permits. Its contents would reopen the case not as folklore, but as a matter of measurable fact. The box that revived the Blackthorne file was discovered accidentally in the spring of 2004 in the basement archives of the Essex County Courthouse. A clerk named Robert Maynard had been instructed to clear a section of mislabeled property ledgers dating from the 40s. Behind a row of mildew-stained boxes, he found one stamped Department of Agriculture, Soil Irrigation Permits, but filled instead with brittle folders marked BH 1908, Restricted. Inside were 147 pages of carbon-copied correspondence between the State Bureau of Surveying, the Public Health Commission, and an entity listed only as Office of Federal Liaison, Albany Subdistrict. Among them was a single photograph labeled Attic North Wall Exposure No. 7, depicting a segment of metal plating embossed with concentric circles intersected by straight lines. Across the lower edge of the print, written in fountain pen, was one phrase, "Resonance complete, 2:17 a.m." Maynard, unaware of the name's significance, filed a discovery report as routine. 2 weeks later, the courthouse basement flooded during a pipe rupture. Nearly everything in that aisle was destroyed, except the folder he had removed for photocopying earlier that morning. When County Historian Dr. Miriam Caldwell learned of the find, she requested permission to review the documents for the Briar Hollow Historical Register. Within days, she recognized the initials BH 1908 for what they were, Blackthorne Hall. Dr. Caldwell's notes describe her growing alarm as she cross-referenced the newly unearthed letters with microfilmed county ledgers. One memorandum, dated April 29, 1909, details a secondary retrieval operation at the estate, led by federal engineer Captain Harold Baines. It mentions the removal of 2 intact objects from the attic and the transfer of those objects to a facility near Rome, NY, for metallurgical analysis. Baines's own accompanying letter calls them resonant plates, noting that they emitted a harmonic vibration inaudible yet physically perceptible, particularly near the spinal column. He further warned that prolonged exposure induces disorientation and a sensation of gravity inversion. His final remark reads, Recommend isolation in non-ferrous containment. The pattern persists even when disassembled. That phrase, "the pattern persists," would echo throughout subsequent decades of correspondence like an incantation. It appears again in a 1912 Bureau of Standards report and once more in a 1934 Department of Defense memorandum reviewing non-ionized electromagnetic phenomena. Dr. Caldwell's analysis suggested that the Blackthorne plates had never been destroyed, merely moved between facilities and reclassified. In June 2004, she traveled to Rome, New York, to consult the records of the now-defunct Griffiths Airfield, which had, during the early 20th century, functioned as a regional materials testing site. She located one surviving ledger from 1909, 1909, listing Delivery BH, 2 units, containment cell 3B. The ledger's final entry, however, is crossed out in heavy ink. Beneath it, faintly visible under ultraviolet light, were the words, "Returned 1911, per Directive 3174. It was the same non-existent executive order referenced decades earlier by archivist Linda Carrington before her death. Dr. Caldwell's notes show that she attempted to trace the order through federal archives but encountered repeated digital access denials. In an email to a colleague dated August 16, 2004, she wrote, "The obstruction is deliberate. Someone still monitors this case file. They know I've seen the plate's designation codes. If anything happens, ensure the originals reach the county museum." The next morning, her car was found abandoned on the shoulder of Route 9 near Keysville. The engine was running, her purse was still inside, and her laptop was missing. No signs of struggle. The sheriff's report lists her as missing, presumed deceased. In September, the folder Maynard had copied vanished from the courthouse archives. Officials claimed it was part of a digital transition project. Yet in October, an envelope bearing no return address arrived at the Saranac County Museum. Inside were 10 pages of photocopies, among them Baines's 1909 letter and the attic north wall photograph. Across the back of the final page, written in blue ballpoint, was a modern addition. They never stopped building. By 2005, the Blackthorne estate site, overgrown but still partially accessible via a disused forest road, had become a point of renewed academic curiosity. The University of Vermont's Anthropology Department received a grant to conduct limited field mapping of the foundations. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team detected a subsurface cavity approximately 8 feet below what would have been the attic's northeast corner. The cavity produced anomalous echo readings suggesting metallic material or dense stonework. When excavation was proposed, federal representatives from the Department of Environmental Conservation arrived and halted the project, citing historic soil contamination. The researchers were required to hand over all recordings. Yet one graduate student, Alan Sykes, kept a duplicate of the raw radar data on a portable drive. In 2007, he published a peer-reviewed article analyzing geometric anomalies consistent with non-natural substructures. Within a month, the journal issued a full retraction at the author's own request. Sykes later withdrew from academia and relocated abroad. Locals began reporting renewed phenomena around the site. Campers described hearing rhythmic vibrations after midnight, 3 pulses followed by silence. Amateur radio enthusiasts recorded intermittent bursts of static on frequencies corresponding to early Morse code, though no translation could be made. A forestry worker named Daniel Pruitt reported a low metallic hum while operating equipment near the ruins, and claimed his compass spun erratically. These testimonies were dismissed as folklore until 2012, when a research team measuring groundwater conductivity in the region documented measurable electromagnetic surges localized precisely to the Blackthorne property. The readings repeated every 87 seconds. The same interval was noted by Dr. Marquette in 1961. The data, published in an internal field memo, reached Dr. James Whitmore, a physicist specializing in geomagnetic resonance at Cornell. Intrigued, he requested permission to install temporary sensors on site. His application was denied. 3 months later, Whitmore received an anonymous package containing a compact disc labeled only a one-transmission loop. The disc contained audio files of low-frequency oscillations matching the Blackthorne interval pattern. Overlay analysis revealed that every third cycle carried a subtle frequency modulation, a harmonic structure too complex for natural origin. When converted into a visual spectrogram, the modulation formed an image. 3 interlocking circles converging at a single point. The same pattern was engraved into the attic plates a century earlier. Whitmore's notes, later leaked through an academic forum, describe his emotional response with uncharacteristic candor. It's as if the signal has been repeating for 100 years, waiting for our instruments to become sensitive enough to hear it. He warned that whatever generated the resonance was self-sustaining and possibly not electrical at all, but dimensionally anchored between physical layers. His university declined further comment, and Whitmore himself left Cornell in 2015, citing fatigue. By this point, the Blackthorne story had evolved from a regional legend to what investigators termed an active frequency event. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration quietly expanded its magnetic survey grid to include the Saranac River corridor. The resulting maps showed faint anomalies centered exactly on the coordinates of the former mansion. When plotted against satellite data, the anomaly's shape resembled a spiral rotating counterclockwise, with the radius increasing each year. The pattern was spreading. When independent researcher Claire Denham obtained declassified NOAA magnetic logs in 2018, she overlaid them with historic property boundaries and realized that the anomaly encompassed the entire footprint of the old Blackthorne estate, extending beyond it in a widening radius. Its rotational timing aligned with solstitial cycles, specifically the summer solstice of 1908, 1937, 1966, 1995, and 2024. The same 29-year recurrence was observed in several other cases, once dismissed as unrelated. If the resonance was indeed temporal rather than spatial, its next peak would occur imminently. And with that realization, the investigation crossed from historical curiosity into immediate concern. The 29th year cycle returned in the summer of 2024. Northern New York had come through a wet spring, but by mid-June the Saranac watershed dried into a stillness, locals described as waiting air. It was during this quiet that a team of graduate researchers from Albany State University, officially cataloging 19th century foundations in Essex County, requested access to the Blackthorne parcel for photogrammetry work. Their permit was granted almost instantly, a rarity that should have raised suspicion. The team consisted of 4 students and 1 supervisor. Dr. Helena Moore, a historian specializing in post-industrial architecture. She later told investigators she had never heard the Blackthorne name before stepping onto the site. They arrived on June 18th, setting up base along the riverbank where the outer wall ruins were visible through the brush. According to their log, they encountered metallic fragments among the stone's thin, curved plates, which, unlike standard roofing material, were warm to the touch despite ambient temperatures below 70 degrees. One student, Ryan Easton, pocketed a small fragment as a souvenir. Within 24 hours, he was hospitalized in Plattsburgh with severe vertigo and auditory hallucinations described as a constant hum punctuated by whispers. Medical imaging revealed abnormal electrical activity in his temporal lobes. Easton recovered physically but refused further interviews. Despite this incident, Dr. Moore's team continued their work. On June 20th, 2 days before the solstice, they documented faint concentric impressions in the soil precisely where the attic had once stood. Using LiDAR scans, they traced 3 circular depressions intersecting at a central point, each measuring exactly 6 feet in diameter. These measurements matched Sheriff Dodd's 1908 report describing the position of the 3 chairs bolted to the attic floor. Moore noted this coincidence in her journal, writing, "It's as if the ground remembers the furniture." That same evening, Briar Hollow residents reported a low-frequency vibration audible across several miles, lasting precisely 87 seconds. Cell phone recordings later confirmed the pattern was identical to the one documented in the 1961 and 2012 measurements. The following night, June 21st, the vibration intensified. A farmer 2 miles west of the site claimed the window panes in his house breathed in and out, flexing without shattering. At 11:58 p.m., weather sensors at the Saranac Ridge station registered an abrupt drop in atmospheric pressure. Then came what witnesses called the pulse. From the direction of the old Blackthorne estate, a column of light rose silently into the sky, blue-white at the base, fading to silver at altitude. The effect lasted 17 minutes again, the precise interval chronicled during previous cycles. Drone footage captured by hikers on the opposite ridge shows the beam expanding outward in 3 distinct rings before vanishing. When emergency services reached the site shortly after 1 a.m., the camp was empty. Equipment remained neatly arranged. 3 tents stood zipped but unoccupied. Only Dr. Moore was found, sitting on the ground near the foundation's edge, staring at the soil. Her statement, recorded 6 hours later at Saranac General Hospital, is the last coherent testimony associated with the case. "They weren't taken," she said. "They aligned. The light was inside the earth before it went up. It was under us the whole time. The sound was coordinated, not noise. They kept saying the same number, 391. Then they turned toward me and said it was complete." Moore refused to elaborate. Psychological evaluation found no evidence of psychosis, only exhaustion and profound dissociation. She withdrew from academia within the year. The missing students, Easton, Carver, and Liu, were never recovered. Search efforts extended for 2 weeks, aided by state police helicopters and cadaver dogs, but yielded nothing beyond a single tripod leg fused into the stone as though melted by extreme heat. Analysis showed no chemical residue consistent with combustion. The object's crystalline structure had altered as if exposed to intense magnetic stress. The Department of Environmental Conservation again closed the area, citing unstable terrain. By late July, aerial survey images revealed a faint geometric pattern etched into the surrounding meadow, 3 rings forming a triangle, their edges defined by dried grass. Locals began referring to it as the mirror field. Satellite readings showed residual thermal differentials persisting for months, despite cool autumn temperatures. When cross-referenced with archived magnetic maps, the hot zones corresponded precisely with the coordinates of the original attic floor. Federal presence returned quietly. Trucks arrived at night. Drones monitored the site through October. No public explanation followed. The only trace of their activity appeared in a December 2024 Department of Interior report on legacy hazardous materials, which listed the Blackthorne parcel under Category H 12 sites deemed permanently stabilized. The phrase recurred across several declassified documents concerning unrelated facilities, an institutional euphemism meaning sealed and ignored. Yet sealed is not the same as silent. In March 2025, amateur radio operator Gordon Wells intercepted an ultra-low-frequency broadcast emanating from within the restricted coordinates. The signal repeated every 87 seconds, identical to prior patterns but with a new element, a modulation that, when sonographically visualized, produced an image of interlocking spirals converging at a central void. Wells uploaded the recording to a small online forum before the post was deleted within 24 hours. He later reported visits from survey contractors who confiscated his equipment. The recording nonetheless circulated among independent researchers. One acoustic physicist, Dr. Althea Morgan, noted that the signal's harmonic structure was mathematically identical to the resonant frequencies of certain architectural proportions, specifically the ratios used in Gothic vaulting. She hypothesized that the attic plates had functioned as a resonator array, amplifying natural geomagnetic oscillations. Her paper, privately circulated among colleagues, concluded with a single sentence: "The builders were tuning space, not measuring it." As 2025 unfolded, additional anomalies appeared within the valley. Power lines hummed despite low current draw. Animals avoided the area. Trail cameras captured transient distortions and shimmers of air shaped like human silhouettes appearing for fractions of a second before dissipating. The local ranger service dismissed these as lens refraction, but those who reviewed the raw frames noted something more troubling. Each silhouette cast a shadow inconsistent with the sun's position. Meanwhile, fragments from earlier excavation, metallic shards sealed in university storage since 2004, were quietly retested. Spectrographic analysis revealed isotopic compositions inconsistent with any known terrestrial alloy. The samples contained trace elements of palladium and tellurium in ratios suggesting synthesis under pressure far exceeding Earth's crustal capacity. When exposed to electromagnetic fields matching the Blackthorne frequency, the samples emitted faint heat and vibrated audibly. The pattern persisted until the equipment was shut down. Investigators attempting to replicate the results reported physical symptoms identical to those described by earlier witnesses: dizziness, temporary amnesia, and a distinct auditory perception of whispering voices synchronized with the hum. Every participant, when asked independently what they heard, recited the same phrase: "The debt is reconciled." That sentence, first engraved on the urns found in 1908, had resurfaced after more than a century, unchanged in wording, tone, and rhythm. By April 2025, regional seismic monitors began recording microtremors at shallow depths beneath Briar Hollow. The events were too small to register as earthquakes, yet occurred with unnerving precision exactly every 87 seconds. The same pulse, the same heartbeat, the same unseen mechanism continuing its operation beneath soil, stone, and silence. Whatever began in the attic had not ended. It had adapted. Locals now avoid the area entirely. Maps show the land as a state forest reserve, yet signage near the access road warns against interference with monitoring equipment. Visitors who stray too close report nausea and time distortion, watches running fast, and voices echoing seconds after speech. And at night, those who camp along the Saranac's curve claim to see a pale blue glow pulsing through the trees, synchronized perfectly with the interval. The next solstice is less than a year away. When public access to the National Archives briefly expanded in mid-2025 during a mass digitization initiative, a series of cross-referenced documents emerged that shifted the Blackthorne file from isolated enigma to systemic pattern. Among the newly indexed items were correspondence logs between the Albany Subdistrict Liaison Office and 3 other locations: Holloway Farm, Missouri, Blackwater Mine, Tennessee, and Boxley Valley, Arkansas, each associated with events characterized by resonant containment protocols and unexplained atmospheric interference. These connections, unnoticed for decades due to redaction, confirmed that the Blackthorne incident had been cataloged internally under a broader designation, THR-29, temporal harmonic recurrence. The first to piece this together was Erin Wallace, an independent historian and digital archivist. Working from her apartment in Utica, Wallace traced metadata patterns across the new database and noticed identical phrasing in multiple sealed summaries. Attic containment successful. Structural resonance continues beneath the threshold. She recognized the recurring number 29 as identical to the cycle measured between each known resurgence of the Blackthorne phenomena. Her curiosity deepened into obsession. In July 2025, she filed a formal Freedom of Information request, seeking the complete THR-29 index. The reply arrived faster than expected. Request acknowledged. No responsive documents found. Yet, embedded in the metadata of the response email was an invisible hyperlink, an outdated internal address leading to an FTP server still active on a Department of Interior domain. Within it lay 37 image files and 6 PDF scans of microfilm reels, all labeled simply Series A1 Concordance. The scans contained maps with hand-drawn overlays dated between 1906 and 1939, showing energy gradients along the Appalachian and Adirondack corridors. The contours resembled seismic lines, but accompanying notes referenced auditory harmonics and phase inversions. One map centered precisely on Briar Hollow. Beneath its title, in blue ink, someone had written, "Primary anchor stabilized, secondary constructs pending completion." Wallace shared her findings with a small circle of online archivists who maintained a private repository for unsolved federal anomalies. Within a week, 2 members reported receiving cease and desist notices, citing unauthorized possession of controlled research materials. Her own internet service was terminated for billing irregularities. Undeterred, she copied the files to offline drives and continued her analysis. What she uncovered next drew a chilling symmetry between the original Blackthorne attic design and military patents filed decades later. A 1951 application by an engineer named Colonel Richard L. Hayes described a frequency-modulated spatial array designed to stabilize resonant field distortion within enclosed chambers. Its schematic was nearly identical to the attic floor plan drawn by Sheriff Dodd in 1908. 3 equidistant points, forming a triangle, each connected by copper conduits to a central node. Hayes's patent was immediately classified under national security and never publicly released. Marginal notes on the declassified summary read, "Concept derived from archival site BH08. Field data viable." By September 2025, Wallace had compiled enough material to publish a long-form exposé online titled The Blackthorne Equation. It traced the progression from 1908 attic plates through mid-century defense research into contemporary geomagnetic monitoring operations. Her thesis proposed that the Blackthorne array was not an accident, but an early prototype of resonance technology capable of manipulating localized time flow, a project the federal government continued covertly. The article remained live for 6 hours before disappearing. Visitors attempting to access the page were redirected to a blank government disclaimer citing cybersecurity compliance. The next morning, Wallace posted a short message to a private forum. "They accessed my drive remotely. If you read this, mirror everything." Then she vanished. Friends filed a missing person report. No record of her leaving her apartment building exists. Only her external hard drives remained, stacked neatly beside her powered-off computer. Each was labeled with a single word, threshold. As media interest briefly surged, local authorities in Essex County took the unusual step of reopening the Blackthorne property for archaeological documentation. The official team comprised state historians and survey technicians, but observers noted unmarked vehicles parked near the perimeter. Drone operators who attempted to film were warned by security personnel that the airspace was restricted due to unstable subsurface gas pockets. No geological evidence supported that claim. Meanwhile, a regional weather satellite detected periodic distortions in the ionosphere above the coordinates. Minor but rhythmic anomalies in atmospheric density, pulsing at the familiar 87-second interval. The phenomenon persisted nightly from September 15th through October 2nd, then ceased abruptly. During this same period, residents reported power fluctuations synchronized with the pulses, street lamps flickering, household clocks resetting, and radios emitting faint overlapping voices. One retired lineman, Thomas Gray, captured audio of the interference. Slowed to 1/4 speed, the static formed discernible syllables repeating a Latin phrase, debitum conciliatum. The debt is reconciled. The recurrence of that phrase across generations suggested intentional communication. Linguists consulted by local media speculated about ritual or religious origins, yet the pattern's precision defied superstition. Scientists noted that no known transmission source could maintain identical timing across more than a century unless automated or self-regulating. That realization introduced an unsettling possibility. Whatever mechanism Edward Blackthorne and his family activated in 1908 had never truly stopped. It had merely gone dormant, sustained beneath layers of soil and bureaucracy. By late October, An anonymous tip delivered to the Plattsburgh Journal claimed federal technicians were installing underground cabling along the Saranac corridor to drain residual charge. The paper published a brief notice before retracting it. The next day, under editorial pressure, residents living near the old estate reported unfamiliar humming machinery at night and faint blue light rising from behind the tree line. When questioned, officials described the activity as environmental monitoring. At the same time, small details began to surface from private collections. A retired archivist revealed a page torn from an internal 1943 memorandum stamped Project Meridian. The text described attic harmonics as localized temporal gateways and warned of uncontrolled egress if energy thresholds misalign. The final handwritten comment read, BH Array Unstable Containment Priority. Caldwell's missing notebook, the vanished graduate students, the resonance cycles, and the magnetic spiral. All of it now appeared as chapters of a single design stretching across generations. Whether a deliberate experiment or an accident elevated to a national secret, the pattern of 29-year intervals remained mathematically consistent. Every recorded incident, 1908, 1937, 1966, 1995, and now 2024 coincided with the summer solstice. Each event lasted 17 minutes. Each produced electromagnetic residue measurable in the same frequency band. And always, afterward, there were disappearances. The implication grew unavoidable. These were not isolated tragedies, but calibrations, each cycle adjusting the mechanism for reasons unknown. The resonance might be consuming, transmitting, or transforming its participants. Nobody could say which. In November 2025, an unmarked letter reached the Essex County Historical Society addressed simply to Archivist on Duty. Inside was a single flash drive containing 3 files. One was a scanned blueprint of the Blackthorne attic, annotated in red pencil. Another, a text document titled THR29, Operating Parameters. And the third, a brief video clip recorded in total darkness. The clip lasts 17 minutes and 2 seconds. The camera remains stationary, pointed toward an unseen light source that pulses in triple rhythm. Midway through, 3 silhouettes appear, human-shaped yet translucent, forming a triangle around the central glow. A faint female voice speaks a single line. We have adjusted the interval. Then the screen goes black. No one has claimed responsibility for sending the package. Its metadata traces to no known network. The Society turned it over to authorities, who have issued no statement. Unofficially, copies circulate among researchers who claim the video's timecode drifts backward by 8 seconds each replay, as if the recording itself is moving against time. And so, the investigation, once thought to concern a single family's misfortune in 1908, now encompasses an entire century's architecture of secrecy, a pattern repeating through documents, technology, and human absence. The question no longer asks what happened inside the attic, but what the attic itself became, an instrument, a conduit, or a wound in the world that refuses to close. The flash drive footage was quietly duplicated before authorities confiscated it, thanks to a museum technician named Andrew Bell, who had performed the initial intake at the Essex County Historical Society. Bell, a methodical archivist by nature, made a single hidden copy for the institution's internal server under the innocuous label Donor Video, 1908. When investigators arrived 2 days later to remove the evidence, they overlooked the duplicate buried among hundreds of digitized oral histories. Bell never mentioned his action in any official statement. Yet his later journal entries reveal that he continued to review the clip almost nightly for the next several weeks. In the first entry, dated December 6, 2025, Bell writes, replayed 17 times. Light frequency seems to change each cycle. Frame 10, 47. Visible distortion of surroundings, not a compression artifact. Possibly environmental interference. By the second week, he noted discrepancies in the timecode. Duration not stable. gains 8-9 seconds each run, sound frequency deepening. In his final recorded note, written January 3, 2026, Bell observed a figure stepping toward the camera during the last pulse, distinct from the three silhouettes first described. He estimated its scale at nearly 8 feet tall. Bell vanished 2 days later. His apartment showed no signs of forced entry, though neighbors recalled a persistent humming noise the night before his disappearance. When police examined his workstation, they found the museum server offline. Upon reboot, the donor video 1908 file had been replaced by a blank folder titled Interval 6 and a short text file containing the phrase, "Return confirmed." Independent analysts soon obtained secondary copies from colleagues Bell had trusted. Among them was Dr. Peter Voss, an image processing specialist from Montreal. He extracted the video's frame-by-frame metadata and discovered that each image contained an embedded geotag pointing to slightly different coordinates, forming a slow outward spiral centered on the original Blackthorne estate. When plotted chronologically, the spiral expanded by exactly 2.9 meters per frame, an echo of the recurring 29-year cycle expressed in spatial scale. Dr. Voss's summary, dated February 2026, concludes, "The footage is not static documentation, but an evolving signal. Each viewing appears to generate a new iteration, slightly displacing its spatial anchor." 2 weeks later, his home laboratory suffered an unexplained electrical fire. Investigators determined the surge originated from equipment that had been disconnected from power for over 12 hours. Meanwhile, independent audio engineer Marina Holt analyzed the soundtrack's harmonic content. She isolated the underlying hum into 3 principal frequencies, corresponding to 39.1, 78.2, and 117.3 Hz, precisely triple ratios, the same figures Dr. Helena Moore recalled hearing during the 2024 solstice event. When slowed to 1/8 speed, the hum produced a subtone matching the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic pulse of Earth's atmosphere. Holt wrote privately to colleagues that the Blackthorne signal might be a feedback loop between the planet and an artificial resonator. Her studio logs end mid-sentence on March 9th. She was found unconscious the next morning, alive but amnesic, repeating the words, "They were measuring the sky through the ground." Blow. In -7. As these incidents accumulated, a consortium of private laboratories operating unofficially under the name Project ACOR began comparing data from multiple sites historically linked to THR-29. Their combined field recordings revealed identical signal modulations emanating from 6 distinct coordinates across the eastern United States, all resonating in phase. The epicenter remained Briar Hollow. Among ACOR's members was Professor Edmund Keller, a geophysicist formerly with the U.S. Geological Survey. His report, leaked anonymously that spring, proposed that the Blackthorne phenomenon represented a standing temporal wave, a distortion of space-time repeating along a 29-year harmonic. Keller suggested that each disappearance corresponded to a moment when the wave's amplitude intersected human consciousness, a synchronization event between observer and field. When pressed about the 3 silhouettes visible in the video, he responded, "They are observers who have synchronized completely." Keller died of cardiac arrest 2 weeks later while lecturing at a private symposium in Boston. Witnesses claimed the projector displaying stills from the Blackthorne footage flickered moments before his collapse, showing 3 white rings of light against a black background. Through the remainder of 2026, federal and academic communication about the incident grew increasingly coded. Official reports referred to localized geomagnetic irregularities, while scientific circles adopted euphemisms like periodic atmospheric nulls. Yet the public, starved for information, filled the vacuum with speculation. Online forums shared slowed excerpts of the leaked audio, describing sensations of pressure changes and phantom whispers when played through headphones. Listeners compared notes, feelings of weightlessness, vivid dreams of staircases leading upward, and, in a few cases, lost time. In late June, almost exactly 1 year after the 2024 solstice, hikers along the Saranac River reported seeing a brief flash above the tree line, a pale cone of light ascending silently into low cloud. Weather stations registered no lightning. Within 48 hours, minor blackouts rippled across the Adirondack grid, concentrated around the old estate's coordinates. The outages followed the familiar rhythm: 87 seconds of darkness, followed by restoration. The Department of Energy dispatched technicians who attributed the anomalies to load balancing errors. Unofficial readings, however, showed electromagnetic pulses peaking at precisely those intervals, strong enough to interfere with aviation compasses. Air traffic controllers at Plattsburgh noted that pilots experienced brief instrument drift over the region, describing their altimeters as sticking, as though gravity itself had paused. By autumn, patterns of human absence began reappearing. 3 hikers vanished within the restricted area between September and November. Only their GPS devices were found, each recording an identical loop of location data that ended where it began, coordinates repeating every 87 seconds until the batteries died. When analyzed visually, the plotted data formed a perfect equilateral triangle. Researchers studying the files noted another anomaly. The timestamp sequence ran backward for the final 2 minutes of each log. In December 2026, a retired postal worker living in Keene Valley came forward with a letter she had kept for decades. It bore the Blackthorne family crest and was postmarked June 20, 1908, 2 days before their disappearance. The envelope had never been delivered, addressed only to the custodian of the record. Inside was a short note written in elegant cursive: "If we succeed, the house will not contain us. It will become the instrument by which the balance is restored. Observe the interval. Protect the light." The signature, though smudged, appeared to read C. Blackthorne. The letter's paper composition matched samples from the period, but the ink contained trace elements of palladium, the same alloy found in the attic fragments. Experts suggested it might have been written using material from the plates themselves. When the letter was presented to state archives for preservation, technicians reported an electromagnetic reading faintly pulsing from the ink lines, cycling every 87 seconds. The pattern persisted. By the year's end, official channels once again sealed the Blackthorne file, classifying all associated research under environmental monitoring. The surviving researchers of Project ACOR disbanded, their data absorbed into government custody. Yet copies of the video, the maps, and the audio loops continued to circulate quietly among archivists, historians, and late-night radio enthusiasts who replayed them not out of belief but out of morbid curiosity. Every replay extended the footage by 8 seconds. Every viewer reported the same residual tone in the ears long after the sound ended. And in nearly every recorded instance, digital clocks near the playback devices advanced precisely 87 seconds during the moment of silence that followed. The resonance had learned to propagate through observation. Whatever had once been confined to an attic in 1908 was now everywhere its story was retold. By the opening months of 2027, the Blackthorne pattern had ceased to belong to a location. What began as an attic phenomenon in a northern New York mansion was now surfacing in data logs and electromagnetic records from multiple continents. The earliest indication came from a seismology station in Iceland, which recorded a shallow harmonic tremor recurring every 87 seconds, lasting precisely 17 minutes each session, and occurring nightly at 2:17 a.m. Coordinated Universal Time. The tremor carried no ground displacement, only a magnetic component identical to the frequency embedded in the Blackthorne recordings. Soon after, shortwave radio operators across North America reported bursts of rhythmic static. The pattern was consistent: 3 pulses, a pause, then a faint human-like hum. Analysts mapped the origin points, expecting randomness, but found instead a perfect arc connecting Briar Hollow to the Gulf of Street, Lawrence, forming an invisible triangle across the northeastern quadrant of the continent. Within that geometric perimeter, atmospheric sensors began to register subtle fluctuations in barometric pressure, as if the air itself were breathing in time with the interval. At first, federal agencies dismissed these coincidences as unrelated noise. But when data analysts from NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center discovered identical sequences embedded within satellite telemetry, denial became impossible. The pattern wasn't a mere echo through Earth's atmosphere. It had infected the digital infrastructure. Every satellite ping containing the Blackthorne frequency showed microscopic timecode drift, 87 seconds forward, then corrected automatically by ground systems. The discrepancy was so small, it escaped human notice until it multiplied across thousands of satellites. In March 2027, the Defense Communication Network initiated Protocol Mirror, a quiet attempt to isolate the corrupted telemetry. Within hours of implementation, several communication satellites ceased transmitting altogether. One ground operator described a blue pulse on his console screen and a whispered female voice through his headset, an impossibility as the channel carried no audio feed. The voice said a single phrase, "We have adjusted the interval." The operator resigned the following day. Meanwhile, in academic circles, a growing number of physicists began comparing the Blackthorne resonance to quantum entanglement phenomena. Papers circulated privately, theorizing that the Attic array in 1908 had accidentally or deliberately created a standing waveform linking 2 points in space-time. If so, each new reproduction of its frequency acted as a key, reopening the interval for a fraction of a second. What unnerved the researchers most was that the interval's strength appeared to increase when humans interacted with it. The more data analyzed, the more intense the readings became. Observation was amplification. The first tangible demonstration of this effect occurred at Cornell's Department of Applied Physics. A team led by Dr. Hiro Tanaka reconstructed the original Blackthorne signal using the leaked audio loops and directed it into a Faraday-shielded chamber. For the first 11 minutes, readings remained stable. Then the air pressure within the chamber dropped by exactly 87 millibar, and an acoustic standing wave formed in the shape of a spiral visible in suspended vapor. Instruments recorded a measurable temperature inversion, cold in the center, warm at the periphery. When the team attempted to shut down the generator, the circuit breakers refused to trip. At 17 minutes and 2 seconds, the now familiar duration, the system collapsed. Every digital clock in the lab advanced 87 seconds simultaneously. The video recording of the experiment gained 8 additional seconds of footage that no camera had captured, a static-filled image of 3 silhouettes standing in the vapor facing the observer. The university sealed the laboratory and classified the incident as an electrical malfunction. Unofficially, witnesses described a scent of ozone and an afterimage that lingered in their vision for days, like a negative of light burned into the retina. As word spread through clandestine research networks, similar experiments began appearing worldwide. Unauthorized replications of the Blackthorne interval were conducted by amateurs, universities, and defense contractors chasing what they now called the resonance effect. Every iteration produced localized anomalies, reversed timestamps, self-starting recording devices, and transient apparitions resembling human outlines. The pattern was metastasizing, embedding itself not only in the ground and air, but also in the very fabric of recorded information. By summer, even civilian technology showed signs of infection. Smartphones left near active Wi-Fi routers emitted brief bursts of static at random intervals of 87 seconds. When slowed and analyzed, the audio waveform displayed faint spectral peaks forming the outline of an equilateral triangle. Public denial followed the same pattern as in 1908. Official reassurances of software bugs and of atmospheric interference. But fragments of the truth leaked through. Amateur videos on social media captured glowing rings of light, rising silently above fields, hovering for 17 minutes before dissolving. Algorithms flagged and removed them within hours. Within the intelligence community, leaked memos revealed a new classification label: Blackthorne class phenomena. The document defined it as self-replicating harmonic distortion propagating via informational mediums capable of inducing localized space-time anomalies. In simpler terms, the resonance had learned to move through stories, signals, and attention. Each mention, each replay, each retelling became a transmission vector. One chilling paragraph stood out. Containment is no longer feasible through physical isolation. The array functions conceptually. Recommendation: cognitive quarantine. Limit exposure to narrative artifacts. Despite these warnings, interest only grew. Journalists began revisiting the old Briar Hollow case, producing podcasts, documentaries, and investigative features. Viewers reported identical after effects: digital clocks skipping ahead, screens flickering at regular intervals, and that same inaudible hum detectable only in the bones. By October 2027, public fascination had reached fever pitch. Every major platform carried references to the Blackthorne signal. Search trends formed perfect waves of engagement, cycling every 87 seconds when mapped globally. On October 21st, a power outage cascaded across the northeastern grid. For precisely 17 minutes, millions of households lost electricity. The blackout extended in an expanding triangle whose vertices corresponded exactly to Briar Hollow, Albany, and Montreal. Witnesses across the region reported identical visual phenomena: columns of bluish light rising through clouds, silent and motionless. Air traffic control logs captured simultaneous magnetic deviation across 500 miles of airspace. When power returned, clocks and computers displayed random timestamps, yet all ended with identical digits: 17. The Department of Energy released a single sentence: grid synchronization anomaly under investigation. Unofficially, it was the largest mass time displacement ever recorded. After the blackout, reports of missing persons began to rise. Not disappearances in the traditional sense. People described loved ones momentarily vanishing for 87 seconds, then reappearing confused, convinced that no time had passed. Physicians observed brief cardiac irregularities in patients during the same intervals. Hospitals in New York, Vermont, and Quebec registered surges of unexplained neurological episodes every 17 minutes past the hour. Each case resolved spontaneously. Then came the first coordinated voice transmission. On December 22, 2027, ham radio operators monitoring low frequencies intercepted a faint but structured message transmitted in triplicate from multiple origins. The signal contained a short spoken phrase in English: "The interval is complete. The debt is reconciled." Following the words came a tone sequence corresponding to the precise geographical coordinates of Briar Hollow. Immediately afterward, the local ground temperature there rose by 4 degrees Celsius. Snow melted in a perfect triangular pattern, exposing the old limestone foundation. Satellite images taken 2 hours later revealed something impossible: 3 dark shapes lying equidistant on the ground, casting no shadow despite the midday sun. The shapes vanished before the next satellite pass. By year's end, the consensus among remaining researchers was bleak. The Blackthorne mechanism was no longer localized nor technological. It had evolved into a conceptual resonance that mirrored itself across perception. Wherever awareness was gathered, scientific, governmental, or public, it amplified. Observation was creation. Each investigation built another attic in the mind, each viewer an unwitting architect of the same geometry. Government agencies ceased official commentary. Unconfirmed rumors described entire data centers being scrubbed, servers magnetically purged to remove traces of the frequency. Yet deletion seemed futile. Each erasure generated a residual echo, the signal returning stronger through alternate channels: radio, internet, or even whispered recollection. Somewhere, in the silence between broadcasts, the interval continued to count down. The next harmonic alignment was projected for June 21, 2028, the summer solstice. No one could say what would happen when the interval reached zero. By early June 2028, northern New York entered a silence that felt deliberate. The birds fell quiet first. Then came the static, a low shimmer in the air that technicians later described as the sound of an electric storm holding its breath. Government sensors that had tracked the Blackthorne interval for decades were switched to passive mode. No one wanted to risk active transmission, and yet the data kept arriving. Every unpowered receiver in the Adirondack region continued to record the pulse 87 seconds apart. 17-minute cycles, its amplitude rising a fraction each day. Across the world, clocks began slipping. Not forward, not backward, but apart. Time zones lost definition. Digital networks struggled to agree on the exact second. Satellites corrected themselves constantly, like nervous systems compensating for vertigo. A private memo from the U.S. Naval Observatory, later leaked, contained a single observation. The planet is humming in 3 keys. At 11:30 p.m. on June 20th, the Saranac monitoring array rebuilt after the 2027 blackout registered a harmonic spike 30 times greater than any previous reading. The spike coincided with a brief geomagnetic lull, a moment when the Earth's magnetic field flattened almost to zero. Witnesses across upstate New York saw auroras the color of burnt copper spiraling downward instead of up. By midnight, the hum was audible to the human ear. In Briar Hollow, a perimeter of floodlights surrounded the overgrown foundation of the mansion. A composite team of physicists, soldiers, and local deputies maintained watch from a command trailer positioned half a mile away. Their instruments recorded a slow rotation of electromagnetic north around the site, as if a compass needle were circling a drain. Then, exactly at 2:17 a.m., the time frozen on the parlor clock 120 years earlier, the rotation stopped. Eyewitness accounts diverge after that. Some describe a soft exhalation, like wind leaving a cavern. Others recall 3 pillars of light rising from the ground, bending outward, then meeting overhead to form a dome of faint blue fire. Inside that dome, they saw shapes moving, not solid, but dense enough to bend the light around them. Sound returned in waves, first the hum, then the whisper. Recordings capture a cadence of syllables overlapping in multiple languages, converging on the same English refrain. Observe the interval. Protect the light. 17 minutes later, the dome imploded silently. The lights vanished. The command trailer's instruments froze. Every digital system within 20 miles reset to 0 hours. The local weather station's barometer, a mechanical device untouched by power, shattered inward. At sunrise, the foundation was gone. In its place lay a circular depression, 40 feet across, lined with glass-smooth stone, as if the soil had melted and refrozen. No bodies, no equipment. Only 3 scorch marks equidistant around the rim, and a smell of iron in the air. Drone footage taken later that morning revealed faint concentric ripples radiating from the center, visible only in infrared. Their frequency, 87 seconds apart. Over the next 48 hours, identical depressions appeared in 7 other countries: Finland, Japan, Brazil, South Africa, Chile, Egypt, and Australia, each at sites known for historical magnetic anomalies, all synchronized to 2:17 a.m. local time. Satellite readings confirmed that every location emitted the same harmonic ratio: 39.1, 78.2, and 117.3 Hz. The resonance had gone planetary. News outlets struggled to maintain broadcasts. Video feeds suffered looping glitches lasting 17 minutes exactly. Anchors found their speech repeating, entire sentences echoing in reverse before continuing normally. The phrase, "the debt is reconciled," began appearing in closed caption text without anyone typing it. When networks tried to cut the feed, the words persisted for 87 seconds after transmission ceased. Governments issued simultaneous emergency statements urging calm, though none explained the phenomenon. In classified channels, officials acknowledged that containment was no longer possible. The array's geometry had 3 points. One node was manifesting at a continental scale, and any attempt to analyze it risked strengthening the field. The only directive was silence. Stop measuring, stop recording, stop telling the story. But silence, too, became part of the rhythm. Wherever the hum fell quiet, it returned louder. Weather systems began aligning to the cycle, wind patterns pulsing like a metronome. The northern lights settled permanently over the 45th parallel, undulating every 87 seconds. Some observers swore they could see faint outlines of buildings, even staircases, shimmering within the curtains of light attics superimposed on the sky. In September 2028, a research buoy in the North Atlantic transmitted what would become the last verified communication from the Federal Monitoring Network. The message contained only raw telemetry and one line of text. Interval expanded. Global synchronization achieved signal self-sustaining. 2 minutes later, the buoy's transponder shut off. After that, there were no more official transmissions, only the residual hum that radios still pick up when tuned just below 40 Hz, a sound some describe as thunder beneath the floor of the world. In cities far from New York, people began reporting shared dreams of a stairwell climbing endlessly toward a circle of light. In each dream, 3 figures stand waiting. They turn, not with menace but recognition, and speak a sentence that listeners wake remembering word for word. "You are hearing what we built." As months passed, measurable time drifted again. Atomic clocks disagreed by fractions that compounded daily. Historians joked grimly that the world had entered the Blackthorne calendar. Each day stretched just beyond its boundaries. Old analog watches, curiously, kept perfect rhythm as though the mechanism's simplicity shielded it from the signal. Collectors began winding them compulsively, hoping the tick might anchor reality to something familiar. Yet, even in that small ritual, the interval persisted. 87 seconds between the long hand's tremors, a faint vibration felt through the skin. Scientists called it psychosomatic. Those who lived near Briar Hollow knew better. They said the land still breathed, that if you placed your ear to the glassy crater at night, you could hear the faint creak of beams settling overhead, the groan of a house that is no longer there but somehow continues. And somewhere within that sound, layered deep beneath static and distance, another rhythm emerges. 3 pulses, a pause, and 3 pulses again, like a heartbeat learning to speak. What it says now is uncertain. What it remembers is everything. The world did not end after the 2028 convergence. It reorganized slowly, unwillingly, into something that could only be measured between intervals. By the winter of 2029, the hum had become background noise, persistent, soft, like air itself had acquired a voice. Clocks still functioned, but no two agreed for long. People learned to stop arguing about time. Instead, they spoke in cycles. A meeting was scheduled 3 intervals from now. Flights departed after 4 hums. Humanity had entered a rhythm older than any clock could define. Northern New York, once evacuated, became the new Greenwich. Where the Blackthorne estate once stood, a vast research structure now occupied the crater's perimeter. It was not officially acknowledged, but satellite imagery revealed a ring of domes and antennae forming an eerily familiar shape, the attic floor plan. Locals called it the Resonance Archive. No one was seen entering or leaving, yet light pulsed beneath the domes at perfect intervals, 87 seconds, 17 minutes, endless. Small towns adapted strangely well. Shops kept handwritten ledgers instead of digital registers. Farmers claimed the hum helped their crops grow evenly, as though the ground itself kept the schedule. But in the cities, unease hardened into ritual. People began synchronizing their movements to the vibration, crossing streets, starting cars, and lighting cigarettes when the faint tremor passed through the soles of their shoes. They said it made them feel connected, safe. Government broadcasts encouraged it. Stay aligned, the pattern protects. At first, no one noticed the other pattern emerging beneath the public calm, selective disappearance. Surveillance cameras captured occasional frame skips and 87 seconds of missing footage, followed by subtle rearrangements of reality. Streetlights shifted position. Trees bent differently. And sometimes, a person visible in one frame simply did not return in the next. Their names faded quietly from records as if the system recalibrated itself around their absence. Archivists became the new front line. Across the world, historians, librarians, and digital preservationists fought to maintain an uncorrupted timeline. The resonance had infected information. Every time a file was opened, its metadata shifted forward by 87 seconds. Hard drives aged decades overnight. Ink bled from pages in symmetrical spirals. Only one preservation method endured: etched metal plates stored deep underground, insulated from electromagnetic fields. Ironically, the same materials were used in the original Blackthorne attic. In 2030, a consortium of surviving archives, Harvard, the British Library, and the rebuilt National Archives of Japan, met in secrecy to establish what they called the Continuity Ledger. Its purpose was simple: record human memory before the hum rewrote it. Entries were carved manually, each marked with the exact moment of inscription by a mechanical clock. The first plate reads, "The 14th of February 2030. The world holds steady at interval 12,453. The hum continues. Yet even the ledger could not escape influence. Those who worked near it reported faint vibrations through the steel. Some claimed they could hear words in the resonance, instructions or apologies spoken in Catherine Blackthorne's voice. One archivist, unable to sleep, wrote a confession in the margins of his log. "I think she succeeded. The house did not die. It multiplied. We are all floors of it now." Outside the archives, new disciplines arose, part science, part faith. Acousticians called them harmonics guilds. Their members mapped the global resonance network, charting regions where the hum grew louder or dimmer. They discovered that the pattern was not uniform. It ebbed and flowed like tides. Certain valleys amplified it, while deserts seemed immune. Over time, cities began to migrate towards silence. Populations moved southward, chasing quiet zones. A new map of the world emerged, drawn not by borders, but by decibels. Meanwhile, stories of the Blackthorne family took on mythic weight. In the absence of reliable history, the line between truth and parable dissolved. Some said Edward had built the array to communicate with something beyond time. Others believed Catherine had tried to stop him, sealing herself inside the resonance to prevent its spread. Her final message, "Protect the light," was now recited like scripture during nightly broadcasts. Those broadcasts themselves had changed. There were no anchors, no images, only a calm narrator reading lists of names, the newly missing, the newly returned, and those caught between intervals. Every 17 minutes, the voice paused for 87 seconds of silence. In that gap, the hum swelled, and listeners swore they could hear the names whispered back, corrected, or replaced. The ledger of the living rewrote itself in real time. By 2031, the phenomenon known as interval bleed became undeniable. People began seeing reflections move independently in mirrors and windows, sometimes lagging behind, sometimes looking directly at them. Scientists proposed that time layers were overlapping, each interval partially transparent to the next. The world was becoming a palimpsest, reality rewritten before the ink dried. One of the last surviving researchers from Project Acor, Dr. Lena Marquette's son, released a statement before disappearing. The attic was not an opening, it was a rhythm. They aligned space to heartbeat. The debt was not punishment, it was symmetry. His message spread briefly, then vanished, replaced by a government advisory labeled auditory contamination. And yet there were still those who refused to stop recording. Underground archivists formed the Order of 217, dedicated to capturing the hum as faithfully as possible. They met only in darkness, speaking softly over analog recorders, timing every word to the pulse. Their founding creed was carved into a copper plate. What is measured survives. Ironically, by measuring it, they ensured the hum's persistence. The Resonance Archive in Briar Hollow remains active, though its existence is officially denied. Pilots flying over the region at night describe a faint luminescence shaped like an equilateral triangle glowing through the forest canopy. Seismic sensors register shallow tremors exactly every 87 seconds, still synchronized with the global cycle. No one dares to approach the crater. Those who have claim, they feel lighter, as if gravity itself forgets them for a moment. The latest entry in the continuity ledger, recorded manually on the 1st of January 2032, carries no author's name, only a simple observation. The hum persists. The intervals are shortening. Everywhere, time seems to breathe faster. Days collapse into sequences of 17-minute stretches, punctuated by silence. In those gaps, lights dim, air cools, and the world tilts infinitesimally closer to something unseen. The hum is no longer background. It has become pulse, prayer, architecture. When people close their eyes now, they do not dream of oceans or sky. They dream of rooms, endless attics stretching upward through clouds, beams humming like strings. Somewhere above, faint voices count in triplets, steady, patient, and reconciled. And when the hum passes beneath your floor or through your chest, you feel the faintest suggestion of movement. Not air, not sound, but alignment, reminding you that the world still keeps its promise to the past. The rhythm never ends. It only changes rooms. Before you continue, take a moment and listen. Really listen. Wherever you are, there's a sound beneath the ordinary noise of your room. It might be the faint thrum of an appliance, the vibration of a passing car, or the slow pulse of your own blood in your ears. Measure it if you can. Count the seconds between each return. If it's 87, that's coincidence. If it's not, that's comfort. Because what follows is a story that doesn't end with the Blackthorne family. It ends where you are sitting now. By the middle of 2032, the resonance was no longer treated as an anomaly. It had become the metronome of human life. Hospitals timed operations to it. The stock exchange in New York reopened under the name Interval Market, its bell chiming every 17 minutes instead of once each morning. Marriages were officiated at 2:17 a.m. because officiants said the vows carried better across whatever bridge connected the living to whatever listened. For the first time in recorded history, every border, every culture, and every faith obeyed the same rhythm. The world had found a single heartbeat, but underneath that unity was the silence of surrender. People stopped asking where it came from. They built houses to hum with the ground, wires woven through the beams the way Edward Blackthorne had done a century earlier. Cities glowed faintly blue at night, rooftops flickering like the attic lamps of 1908. In archives and observatories, researchers who had once studied the signal began describing themselves as caretakers rather than scientists. They said their duty was to tend the pattern, not to understand it. They signed their correspondence not with dates, but with phrases like, during the 14,992 interval. One day in early autumn, a maintenance crew in the Adirondacks uncovered a small metal capsule buried near the old crater. Inside was a handwritten page sealed in wax. The ink had faded almost to nothing, but ultraviolet scanning revealed a message. The interval was not meant to free us, but to remind us. Remember that observation is invitation. Do not build new rooms. No one could identify the author. The handwriting did not match any known sample from Catherine or Edward, but some archivists claimed the strokes were too regular, too deliberate, as though traced by a hand that had learned writing from memory, not muscle. The note was catalogued under Object 217A and promptly disappeared from public access within a week. After that, no new discoveries were reported. The hum neither increased nor decreased. It simply endured, steady as breathing. People adapted completely. The last human generation born before the resonance called themselves the analog dead. Their children heard the hum from birth and called it music. Schools taught intervals instead of hours. Calendar pages bore only cycles of 17 minutes of light and 17 of dark, repeated 42,000 times a year. And still, deep beneath the noise of civilization, the pattern folded back upon itself, drawing everything toward its quiet center. That center, some said, was the Blackthorne attic, the first room to hum in rhythm with something larger than itself. Others said the center had moved long ago, that it followed attention like a mirror follows light. Every retelling of the story, every mention of the family, built a new version of the room in someone's imagination. And because imagination itself is electrical, every version contributed to the field. The attic was never rebuilt. It was remembered into existence everywhere. In 2033, the Resonance Archive transmitted a single public broadcast, the first in years. A plain signal, open frequency, no encryption, no voice, just 17 minutes of silence bracketed by 3 faint pulses. Listeners who amplified the recording claimed to hear a whisper buried deep within, too faint for language, but arranged like words spoken across water. Linguists later suggested the cadence resembled the phrase, "interval complete." The transmission ended at 2:17 a.m. The archive lights dimmed and never came on again. After that night, the global hum subsided by a fraction. Not silence, but a pause and an exhale. Clocks hesitated. Winds lost their rhythm. For the first time in decades, the sky above Briar Hollow was dark and unbroken. A local farmer driving home along the old state road reported seeing the shape of a house standing in the field where the crater had been. Its windows glowed faintly from within, and in the uppermost pane he swore he saw a woman's silhouette looking out. When he blinked, the light was gone. The hum resumed, softer than before, as if content to rest. Archivists debated whether the event marked an ending or merely another cycle. But most agreed that the interval had proven one thing: the past is not buried beneath us. It moves with us, synchronized through every pulse of awareness. The Blackthorne secret was never mechanical, never occult. It was simply the revelation that memory, when amplified by attention, can alter the physics of the world. We remember, therefore it persists. We listen, therefore it breathes. And now you've listened too, which means, in some faint and immeasurable way, you're part of the interval. The hum will follow you when this video ends, not as fear, but as an echo. Maybe you'll hear it tonight in the radiator or the whisper of wind against your house. Maybe you'll notice the clock skip a single minute. If you do, don't be alarmed. It's only the archive opening another room, marking another listener who found their way to the story. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered where history, evidence, and silence overlap, then subscribe to stay with us. Leave your location and the exact time you heard these words in the comments below, because time and place still matter. Each mark helps us trace the reach of what began in that attic more than a century ago. Until the next interval, keep your lights steady, your records clean, and your clocks honest. Somewhere, the Blackthorne hum continues, and somewhere it is waiting to hear from you.